Now that I'm practically a solid bone, it's a bit of a challenge for me to do. Guitarist Mick Mars has long been the unsung hero of Mötley Crüe, responsible for the band's signature sound and electric energy. Through his unforgettable solos, scorching riffs, and unparalleled drive, Mars became the musical engine that propelled Mötley Crüe. After decades in the spotlight, Mars is finally making her voice heard. Now 73 years old, he reveals the hidden truths about the band's troubled history, revealing issues that fans were unaware of. How did these hidden truths influence the Mötley Crüe that emerged after the band's breakup? Mick Mars' rise to prominence as one of rock's most influential artists wasn't without its challenges. Robert Allen Deal, better known as Mick, came into this world in Terre Haute, Indiana on May 4, 1951. He was born into poverty. His family sought a better life in Garden Grove, California, when he was a child. When Mick was younger, though, he had it rough. From an early age on, he struggled, and those struggles would shape his life. Back pain first manifested for Mick at the tender age of 14. This would be an ongoing issue for him. His condition was later diagnosed as ankylosing spondylitis, a form of arthritis that causes the spine to fuse together, leading to ongoing pain and limited mobility. Growing up, Mick realized that his body just wasn't cut out for singing, despite his lifelong dream of being a singer. Every day his body fought him, but he found solace in music, which gave him the will to live despite the excruciating pain he endured. When Mick was in his late teens, he developed a strong passion for music. He devoted a lot of time to learning guitar by studying the styles of legends like Elvis Presley and surf rocker Dick Dale. When Mick was 18 years old, he hurt his hand on the job, and his singing career nearly came to a halt. Yet Mick was determined to carry it out. He left his factory job and dove headfirst into music, despite the hardships that came his way. His ambition to become a rock musician and his passion for playing the guitar motivated him to improve. In the bars and clubs of Southern California, he was a member of a couple of neighborhood bands. One of the most well-known of these pioneering groups was Whitehorse. As a result of them, Mick gained fame in the underground rock community. This is when word started to spread about Mick as a talented guitarist who played with heart. He was well respected for his untamed spirit and guitar prowess, but he was never financially successful. And that Mick didn't want to blend in was crystal clear. He wanted to carve out a niche for himself. In 1980, Mick decided to do something bold. By rebranding himself as Mick Mars, he shed his former identity and assumed a new one. With his newfound identity in hand, Mick took to the local paper to advertise for musicians who shared his passion. No matter what obstacles life threw at him, Mick never stopped finding his place in the rock world. This is what I knew I was going to do as a child, right? Learn to play the guitar. However, I couldn't help but wonder, what is Grandpa doing there? When I noticed that there were a lot of elderly people on the site. You don't really give much thought to the sound of bands from the 80s, 90s, 70s, and 60s like the Rolling Stones, because the majority of your fans were around when you were growing up. The path to stardom for Mick Mars and Mötley Crüe wasn't a picnic. It was filled to the brim with profound musical contributions and personal struggles. Mötley Crüe were no different from any other rock band in 1981 when they first formed in Los Angeles. What set them apart, though, was Mick Mars' incredible guitar playing, as well as their raw energy and defiant attitude. The band's sound and identity were both shaped in large part by Mick's playing, which was there from the beginning. In 1981, Mötley Crüe released their debut album, Too Fast for Love, which introduced the world to the band's sound. It was more than just music, it had a message. The distinctive guitar riffs played by Mick laid the groundwork for an aggressive, brutal, and truthful album. The first track, Livewire, showcased Mick's furious yet melodic playing with its heavy distortion and precise note selections. His guitar served as the foundation for the band's freewheeling performances and was an integral aspect of their sound. Even though the band was swiftly gaining many devoted followers, Mick had to deal with some tough times in his life. While all this was going on, he was juggling the demands of the music industry with the ongoing discomfort of his ankylosing spondylitis. A swollen and fused spine made every movement excruciatingly painful due to the disease. No matter how much pain Mick appeared to be in while performing, he always managed to keep it hidden. He persevered through the agony and composed some of rock's most iconic guitar riffs. Even though it was physically taxing, he would frequently play for long periods of time. In the early 1980s, when Mötley Crüe's fame was on the rise, Mick's impact on the band's sound was more apparent than ever before. The band's iconic status in rock music was solidified with the 1983 release of Shout at the Devil. The emphasis was on Mick's guitar playing, and the record was darker, heavier, and more polished than their debut. Their unique, raw edge was given by Mick's guitar riffs, and the songs Looks That Kill and Too Young to Fall in Love became instant hits. Among the many things that set Mötley Crüe apart was Mick's skill at crafting powerful and unforgettable guitar solos. There was no denying the profound effect that Mick had on the group. Despite the band's rising stardom, Mick's private issues persisted. The band's infamously bad habits, long hours on the road, and rigid routines exacerbated his illness, which was already causing physical pain. Mick chose to keep a low profile in contrast to his teammates Nickel Six, Tommy Lee, and Vince Neil, who were heavily involved in the Wild 1980s rock scene partying. He wasn't interested in the drug and alcohol scandals that were reported in the news involving him or his friends. He redirected his attention to his guitar and the music he composed instead. He found solace in playing guitar, which allowed him to convey his emotions and transcend his inner turmoil. As their star began to rise, the band felt increasing amounts of pressure. Rock legends Mötley Crüe rose to prominence with 1985's Theater of Pain, 1987's Girls, 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 and 1989's Dr. Feelgood. Their earlier work was notable for its raw energy, and although Mick's playing improved on these albums, it retained that quality. She said, "You should know that I went to rehab. I returned after finishing my stay in treatment. I began abusing substances. For a few weeks, I stopped doing everything at once. In any case, I had a severe overdose. My goodness, it happened nearly 20 years ago. Reached the medical facility. It was released. Again, shot up, another overdose. The following morning had passed. The light was turned on when I awoke. That was it. Never again did I pick up." Theater of Pain's Home Sweet Home is one of their numerous songs. On this song, which featured a rhythm that differed from the band's customary heavier sound, Mick played guitar at his softest. Even in the stillness, Mick's ability to evoke emotions through music was audible. However, Mick's sense of belonging in the band began to erode over time. The domestic issues Mick was facing intensified as Mötley Crüe persisted in breaking rules and garnering media attention. His health deteriorated, and he frequently experienced pain following concerts because he was unable to maintain the same level of physical activity as the rest of the band. Not only was he physically sick, but he was also emotionally and mentally isolated. He stood out from the crowd due to his reserved nature, in contrast to his friends who embodied the negative image of Mötley Crüe. Even though the connection between Mick and the other members of the band was weakening, it didn't spare him any emotional impact. It was unclear what Mick's role was in the band when Dr. Feelgood came out, and he was already dealing with a new problem. He was further sidelined despite the fact that his guitar work remained integral to Mötley Crüe's sound. Vince, Nicky, and Tommy were the band's public faces, so they were always easy to spot. Since most of his friends were quite outgoing, Mick preferred to keep to himself as a partner. It wasn't a reflection of Mick Mars' skill, because he was an integral part of Mötley Crüe's success. However, he was exhausted from his wild lifestyle and private issues, and he no longer commanded attention. Despite everything, Mick's love for music remained unwavering. His physical pain didn't stop him from playing with all his might. His influence on Mötley Crüe's sound was evident in the enduring strength and infectiousness of their guitar riffs. Little did anyone know that Mick was struggling behind the scenes. He was in excruciating pain on all fronts, physically and psychologically. Despite the worsening of his personal issues, Mick Mars remained faithful to Mötley Crüe. He was one of the most revered and underappreciated guitarists in rock and roll history due to his dedication to his craft and refusal to give up. Even though Mötley Crüe reached new heights in their career, Mick's problems persisted. But he persisted in playing and contributing to the band's success as his health deteriorated. Despite suffering greatly and losing loved ones along the way, he ultimately succeeded. But no matter what happened, Mick Mars' devotion to Mötley Crüe and music would remain unwavering. As time passed, Mötley Crüe's internal issues became more apparent, and they only got worse with each new album. Despite the band's fame and fortune brought about by their 1980 smash hit, the members began to feel alienated from one another. Slowly but surely, the seemingly perfect rock and roll success story was unraveling from the inside out. From the very beginning, Mick Mars played guitar for the band. His friendships with his coworkers had deteriorated to the point where they were beginning to fall apart. The band's wild antics, including drug use, wild parties, and general disorder, were hallmarks of their early career. A shared love of rebellion and rock music eventually gave way to egos, exhaustion, and widening gaps in opinion. Being a member of Mötley Crüe was not all roses for Mick. He also had to overcome emotional and physical anguish on a daily basis. His ankylosing spondylitis, a condition that causes the spine to fuse, had been steadily worsening for a long time. Mental and physical challenges were intensified as Mick's body began to deteriorate. It appeared like the rest of the band enjoyed their hectic lifestyle. The first major red flag was when Mick's health began to deteriorate, making it harder for him to tour. As the rest of Mötley Crüe reveled in their world tours and the fruits of their labor, Mick struggled to keep up. Even though Mick's pain was becoming unbearable, he kept quiet about it to his friends. Instead, he persisted, seldom complaining about the physical strain. The constant ache in his knees and back was making him question whether he should continue playing in the band, despite his desire to be there for his friends. The band's wild party lifestyle was popular with his teammates, particularly Tommy Lee and Vince Neil, but this began to strain their relationship. Both in and out of the house, Mick was beginning to feel isolated. Thanks to their magnetic personalities and wild antics, Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee were never out of the headlines, but Mick didn't exactly relish the limelight. His guitar playing was the foundation of the sound they created, and he was always attentive to the music. Conversely, Mick felt underappreciated for his contributions to their triumph. Things deteriorated further in the mid-1990 as Mick's health deteriorated. The constant motion and strain on Mick's body finally got the best of him. After years of touring and recording non-stop, the increasing severity of his pain forced him to take increasingly longer breaks. Mick despised being compelled to do this. As the band entered a new musical era in the 1990s, their sound began to evolve, and Mick found himself increasingly isolated from the group. The focus began to move to Vince, Nikki, and Tommy as they emerged as the public faces of Mötley Crüe. Mick, who had been the band's primary inspiration in its formative years, gradually receded into the background. The lowest point was when Mick, after decades of playing together, decided to leave the band. After announcing that his health was deteriorating, Mick Mars left Mötley Crüe in 2022. Despite Mick's best intentions, the situation escalated into a brawl in no time. There was no back and forth or discussion when the band announced that guitarist John Five would be replacing Mick. The statement was merely indifferent. As a result, Mick Mars felt scammed. The band's management claimed that Mick's health forced him to resign, but Mick claimed that Nicky, Vince, and Tommy had plotted his departure by seizing control of the band's finances and forcing him to sell his 25% ownership stake for a pitiful fraction of its true value. The band was accused by Mick of stealing from him for years during the contentious court case. Claims that Nikki Sixx did not play bass live during the band's tours, that Tommy relying heavily on backing tracks for drums, and that Vince's singing were among the shocking facts revealed in Mick's case. It was Mick's assertions that shocked the music industry. Fans of the group had long assumed that the band's image included a wild rock and roll lifestyle, but Mick's case revealed a different side. He claimed that the band members he had once considered brothers were now out to discredit him and his contributions. It was shocking for fans to see the band's deceitful and treacherous side in the court documents. Mick refused to back down, no matter how angry people were with him. Money wasn't the only thing he battled for. Fight he did for honor. His guitar work and songwriting were the band Mötley Crüe's lifeblood for many years. The band meant everything to him, and he sacrificed his physical and mental well-being for them. He was now being disregarded as if he were a relic from another era. That was unacceptable to Mick. Despite the ongoing court proceedings, Mick made it plain that he would get what was rightfully his. From that point on, Mick's life and career took a turn for the better. Mick was no longer prepared to remain motionless. The will to resist washed over him. His motivations in going to court weren't merely financial. He also wanted recognition for his contributions to Mötley Crüe's success and protection of his honor. The guitarist Mick Mars was instrumental in creating the sound that characterized a generation. Even now, music remained Mick's lifeblood. He was unwilling to allow the band he had laboriously helped form to discredit him. Despite deteriorating health and fractured friendships, Mick Mars persisted in honing his craft. He was determined to continue his singing career regardless of how challenging things became in the band. His insatiable need to create, play, and express himself could not be stifled. Even if the band attempted to erase the past, Mick Mars's reputation would remain. Mick Mars had to make a decision. Despite decades of performing with Mötley Crüe, he ultimately left the band due to the severe pain he endured from his ankylosing spondylitis. His decision to quit the band was not made hastily. For over 4 decades, Mick had been an integral part of Mötley Crüe, providing the driving force behind the band's signature sound. His guitar riffs, which could be dark and terrifying at times, were the foundation of Mötley Crüe's music. Therefore, getting off the stage wasn't merely a chore, it was also a deeply personal experience. The silent warrior, Mick, the rock star, would not sit idly by while his career came to a close. In 2022, Mick finally decided to quit performing with Mötley Crüe, despite intense pressure from within and without the band. His health was deteriorating, so he informed them he was stepping back from live performances, but he wasn't leaving the band entirely. His back condition prevented him from enduring the physically demanding demands of a band tour. It appeared like his influence was coming to an end when Mötley Crüe swiftly announced that guitarist John Five would be replacing him. For Mick, the icy, business-like remark felt like a punch in the face. For someone who had dedicated their entire life to the band, this abrupt departure felt more like having his legacy erased than a welcome retirement. Nonetheless, Mick Mars was far from defeated. After spending years playing under the shadow of Mötley Crüe's wild antics, Mick was finally directing his own story. His health prevented him from going on the trip, but that didn't dampen his creative spirit. Mick took a giant leap forward in his career when he began producing his first album independently. Leaving the shadows behind, it was time to face the light. Without regard to the opinions of others or the expectations of the band, Mick Mars was prepared to share his story, but only in his own unique way. Prior to beginning the process of creating his solo CD, Mick had never done anything comparable. For the first time in his career, he wasn't burdened with the expectation of living up to the Mötley Crüe name. Neither the mayhem of touring, nor the public's perception of the band, nor his relationships with his contemporaries were concerns for him. The musician and performer Mick Mars was here. At this point, he could let his imagination run wild. His intended title for the deeply introspective album was The Other Side of Mars, and it would feature not just his musical influences, but also narratives from his own life. This was Mick Mars's opportunity to embark on a new creative path, fully express himself, and shed the Mötley Crüe image. The Other Side of Mars shocked fans and critics alike upon its release in 2024. The album revealed Mick's artistic identity. It was raw, emotional, and unfinished.